The assembly hall grows quiet. Duryodhana has taken his seat away from the dice board, a small but telling distance, and announced that his uncle Shakuni will play in his place. Every man in the Sabha knows what this means. Shakuni of Gandhara is a dicer of uncanny skill. The dice are almost always in his hand. Everyone present knows his throws carry something beyond ordinary luck. And yet Yudhishthira, Dharmaraja, the king whose chariot once floated above the earth in tribute to his righteousness, sits down across from him and prepares to play. This is the scene that has troubled readers of the Mahabharata for centuries, not because it is incomprehensible, but because it is so recognizable. The most principled man in the epic is about to lose everything he loves, and he knows it, and he sits down anyway. The Sabha Parva, the second of the 18 Parvas of the Mahabharata, is traditionally divided into subsections. The Dutta Parva, which covers the dice game itself, runs through chapters 46 to 73 in the traditional numbering. What unfolds there is not simply a story about gambling. It is a sustained meditation on the limits of Dharma when Dharma turns rigid, on how virtue can be weaponized against the virtuous, and on what happens when the inner architecture of a principled person contains one unexamined fault line. Before the first throw, Yudhishthira actually speaks his reservations aloud. In section 58 of Ganguly's translation, he says directly to Shakuni, "Do not, O Shakuni, playing desperately, win of us that wealth, with which according to our abilities we strive to learn how to benefit the Brahmanas. Even enemies should not be vanquished by desperate stakes in deceitful play. I do not desire either happiness or wealth by means of cunning. The conduct of one that is a gamester, even if it be without deceitfulness, should not be applauded." Read that sentence again slowly. I do not desire happiness or wealth by means of cunning. This is a man who knows that what is about to happen is morally suspect. He names it, he registers it aloud, in front of witnesses, and then he plays. This is not irony inserted by a later editor. This is the Mahabharata doing what the Mahabharata always does, showing us that self-knowledge and self-governance are not the same thing. The Sanskrit psychological tradition has a name for the force that overrides self-knowledge. It sits inside the concept of asakti, attachment, not merely fondness, but the kind of habituated pull that bends perception itself. The factual record here is precise. Yudhishthira had a weakness for the game of dice. His fondness for gambling far outstripped his skill. Shakuni had identified this exactly, telling Duryodhana that the Pandava brothers could not be defeated in battle or by virtuous means. The only entrance was through Yudhishthira's one unguarded door. Then there is the question of compulsion, layered over that asakti. 3 separate pressures converge on Yudhishthira to make refusal nearly impossible. Dicing was ceremonially embedded in the Rajasuya ritual Yudhishthira had just completed. It was not merely entertainment, but a customary element of Kshatriya sovereignty. The warrior code held that a king who declined a formal challenge dishonored his caste duty entirely. And crucially, the invitation came from Dhritarashtra himself, the blind king and elder patriarch whose authority carried the weight of a royal command. Kshatriya Dharma, as Arjuna himself later articulates, does not permit refusal of a legitimate challenge. This is the trap within the trap. The outer trap is Shakuni's fraudulent dice. The inner trap is that the very thing Yudhishthira reveres most, Dharma, duty, the code of a righteous king, has been turned into the mechanism of his destruction. Shakuni has done something far subtler than cheat. He has arranged the game so that Yudhishthira's virtue becomes the walls of his cage. Vaishampayana, narrating to Janamejaya in section 58, records the mechanism bluntly. Hearing Yudhishthira announce the stake, Shakuni, adopting foul means, said unto Yudhishthira, "Lo, I have won it." The language is bare, adopting foul means. The narrator does not soften it or explain the technical method of the fraud. The moral verdict is simply inserted and the game moves on. Round after round, brothers staked, self-staked. In the 20th round, Draupadi. Consider what it means for a person to reach that moment, to have already lost brothers, kingdom, freedom, themselves, and still extend the hand for one more throw. The Mahabharata does not explain this as demonic possession or divine curse, though both frameworks appear elsewhere in the epic. Here, the text holds something more uncomfortable. A man with a compulsion he cannot interrupt, even when everything he loves depends on interrupting it. There is someone most of us have watched from closer than we would like. A parent, a sibling, a friend, caught in something they cannot stop. Not necessarily gambling, perhaps drinking through a marriage that is unraveling, perhaps spending in ways that make no sense even to them. The compulsion and the self-knowledge running side by side, neither one canceling the other. And the people who love that person standing at the edge of the room, not knowing whether to speak or stay silent, because every intervention so far has failed. The Mahabharata does not offer a resolution for this dynamic. It simply shows it, at full scale, with cosmic consequences. That refusal to look away is part of what makes the text endure. After Draupadi is dragged into the Sabha, she does not weep or plead, she sends a question. Through the messenger Pratikaman, in sections 66 and 67 of the Ganguly translation, she asks, "What prince is there who playeth staking his wife?" The king was certainly intoxicated with dice, else could he not find any other object to stake? And then the sharper edge. If a man has already lost himself, does he retain any legal standing to stake another person? This is not merely an emotional protest. It is a forensic challenge to the dharmic legitimacy of the entire proceedings. Draupadi, Krishna, Panchali, Yagisheni, all three names carrying different dimensions of her nature, has located the one structural flaw in Shakuni's victory, and the assembly falls silent. One of Dhritarashtra's own sons answers her. Vikarna, in section 67, stands and says, "The innocent Draupadi is besides the common wife of all the sons of Pandu." And the king, having first lost himself, offered her as a stake. And Suvala himself, desirous of a stake, indeed prevailed upon the king to stake this Krishna. Reflecting upon all these circumstances, I regard Draupadi as not one. A Kaurava, a son of the blind king, publicly defends her. He names three problems: the shared nature of her marriage, Yudhishthira's prior loss of himself, and Shakuni's manipulation of the stake. The argument is sound. Karna overrides it anyway, and the disrobing begins. What happens next? Dushasana pulling at her garment, Krishna's divine protection multiplying the cloth endlessly, is not the moment the text wants us to linger on for our purposes here. The more philosophically devastating moment has already passed, and it is this. Bhishma, the recognized authority on Dharma, the Pitamaha who has held the moral memory of the Bharata lineage for generations, is directly asked to rule on Draupadi's question. And he cannot. In Sabha Parva, Adhyaya 69, verses 15 and 16, Bhishma says to her, "Nad dharma saukshmiyat subhage vivektam shaknomi te prashnam imam yathavat." I am unable to determine this question of yours properly, O Blessed One, because of the subtlety of Dharma. Dharma saukshmiyat. Because of the fineness, the subtlety, the almost microscopic complexity of Dharma. This single word carries more than an admission of intellectual difficulty. It is a confession that dharmic reasoning, applied honestly and without power behind it, can arrive at genuine impasse. Bhishma also says what the scholar Srinitha Sarao quotes in his commentary on this passage. What a strong man says often becomes the only dharma. A weak man may have dharma on his side, but who listens to him? This is Bhishma not merely acknowledging nuance, but acknowledging that dharma in practice is always embedded in politics, in power, in who holds the room. Vidura has already said what he knows. In section 58 he warned Dhritarashtra directly, "A jackal is living in thy house, O king, in the form of Duryodhana. Thou knowest it not in consequence of thy folly." The medicine to a dying man-image is Vidura's own, bitter, urgent, probably already too late. Dhritarashtra hears it and does nothing until the hall has erupted. Think of someone who has watched someone they love move toward a destructive decision. a child picking a path that seems to be slowly dismantling them, and the parent who sees it and speaks and is ignored, not because the warning is false, but because the warning requires the listener to want to change. Vidura's tragedy in this scene is not that he lacks wisdom. It is that wisdom unaccompanied by the listener's willingness to act is simply sound moving through a room. Dhritarashtra eventually intervenes. He restores to Yudhishthira everything lost, but Duryodhana, Karna, and Shakuni take the blind king aside immediately afterward and argue that the outcome was unjust, that the game cannot be allowed to end this way. A second game is summoned. The Pandavas are called back. The second game ends in 12 years of exile and 1 year in concealment, which is a different and longer story. What to carry forward into your actual day? Dharma, as the Mahabharata presents it through this scene, is not a set of fixed rules that reliably produce just outcomes when followed faithfully. It is sukshma, fine, subtle, context-dependent, perpetually at risk of being captured by power or bent by compulsion. Yudhishthira is called Dharmaraja, not because he never fails, but because he is the one who continues to ask the question, even when the question has cost him everything. The asking itself is the practice. The dice have already been thrown. The question is whether you are still asking.